The most important step in your marriage visa process is the interview. This is the most crucial aspect of the whole thing. This can make or break your case. So let's talk about how to prepare for the marriage visa interview. I am U.S. immigration attorney Lillian Chukura, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. The first thing you need to do once you interview is to get prepared. You want to make sure that you have your medical exam done at least 2 weeks before the interview. If you miss that 2-week period, if you don't get your medical exam done before your interview, the officer will be forced to refuse you the visa until your medical is done. So you really want to make sure that you are getting your medical done at least 2 weeks before the interview so that the officer can have your medical before you come in for your interview. Secondly, you want to make sure that you have all the documents, right? When you apply for your visa, you send in a bunch of documents. You want to make sure that you have the originals of those documents, such as your passport, your birth certificate, marriage certificate, if there was any divorce certificates, okay? You want to make sure that you have that for your interview so that if the officer wants to see the original, you already have it. That is really important. You don't want the officer to refuse you the visa and ask you to bring in the originals at a later date. You want your interview to be a one-time deal. The officer reviews everything, asks you a few questions, and is actually able to approve you your visa at that interview. If you do not have all the documents, the officer is not able to actually approve you your visa on that date. Another document you want to make sure that you have for your interview is the police clearance certificate. If you do not have this, if you didn't submit it, you want to make sure that you have it because, again, the officer wants to make sure that you have all your documents. The police clearance certificate tells them that you do not have any criminal charges in your country. If you have lived in multiple countries, you will need police certificates from those countries. Depending on how long you lived there and how old you were when you lived there, you may need that from those countries. So you want to make sure that you have all of those, the originals, ready for your interview. Another section of documents that you want to bring to the interview is documents proving your relationship. So if you talk by WhatsApp, if you have pictures with each other, you need to document it and bring it to the interview because the officer may want to see additional proof of your relationship, that you are still in a marital relationship, that you are still communicating, that you are still building a life together. So make sure that in addition to all the other documents, right, the technical required documents, that you are also bringing documentation that proves your relationship. Now that you know the documents to have prepared and ready for your interview, you want to also make sure that you are ready for the questions. The questions are where people mess up. Okay, when it comes to the visa interview, the officer is going to ask you a few questions. They don't have time to go into a 1-hour interview. Okay, they're going to ask you a few questions and they're going to base their decisions on your answers to those questions. So for example, they're going to ask you questions about your spouse, where they live, where they work, how you met, anything about them that they can find out from the forms you have submitted. So for example, if their parents are still alive, they may ask you where the parents live, the parents' names, all those things. Where was your spouse born? Where did they grow up? Things like that they can fairly gain from the forms that they have access to. So knowing the answers to those basic questions is what's really going to make your interview smooth. If you cannot answer basic questions about where your spouse lives, what their name is, date of birth, where they were born, their parents' names, where their parents live, things like that, the officer is going to have red flags going off, and you do not want that. So you need to be prepared to answer those basic questions about your spouse. You need to be ready to answer questions about yourself, your immigration history. So if you have ever applied for a visa before, so a visiting visa in the past, you need to remember everything you put on that visiting visa application and make sure that you are not contradicting yourself in that interview. The officer will most likely ask you questions about you and your spouse, your life together. How do you communicate? Where do you, how often do you speak to each other? How often do you see each other in person? Those are questions to gauge how in touch you two are. Because you don't get to see each other every single day, because you live in two separate countries and sometimes two separate continents, it is important for the officer to know that you are in communication, that you are still maintaining that marital relationship while you're separated. So the officer may ask you, when was the last time you two spoke? When was the last time you saw each other in person? How often do you speak? What is the method that you speak to each other in? So if you say we talk on WhatsApp, you better have WhatsApp messages to show your relationship. Remember, when you are at the interview, the officer is asking you specific questions. Answer the specific questions. What people do is that the officer will ask them a specific question. Instead of just answering that question, they'll start talking about other things. And whatever you're telling the officer, they can then use that against you. Okay? Whatever you tell the officer, they can use it against you. So make sure that you are just answering the question. You're not giving extra information that's unnecessary to the situation. So for example, if the officer asks you, when was the last time you saw your spouse in person? I saw them last June when they came to see me, right? You don't then start adding extra information. Ask the question, answer the question that is asked. If the officer wants more information, they will ask you. So back to that example, after you answer the question of, I saw them last June, the officer may ask you, what did you do? Where did you stay? Then you give that information, right? Because that's what the officer wants to know. If you start talking about other things, it's not really relevant to the situation. The officer has specific questions, they will ask you. By the way, if you are getting value out of this video, please make sure to hit the like button and share this video with anyone you know that is going through the marriage visa process. Now that you know what documents to bring to your interview, what questions to be prepared for at the interview, let's talk about some do's and don'ts. Please do come on time, okay? Listen, in some countries, there's only one U.S. embassy. You have to travel hours and hours to get there. I know, but please be on time, okay? At least 15 minutes early, because you may need to go through security. You may need to do other things. Make sure that you are on time for your interview. Make sure you are dressed appropriately. Officer is not supposed to judge you by what you wear. However, you want to present yourself in a good way, right? You don't want to go there with shorts and tank tops and all of those things. You want to dress appropriately to the interview, because you want your outfit, whatever you're wearing, to match the event that you're going to. The visa interview is important, so you want to treat it that way. You want to dress to match the event that you're going to. Please do not forget your documents. Do not forget your documents, because if you forget it and the officer wants to see that specific document, they will refuse you the visa and have you go get the document, make an appointment to drop off the document, wait for them to review the document, and then they will make a decision. That's months of waiting. Okay, you don't want those months of waiting. You want the officer to be able to have everything they need to make a decision on your case. Another thing to keep in mind here is that your U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse does not have to go to the interview with you. The officer, if they show up, right? If your US citizen or permanent resident spouse shows up with you to the interview, the officer has the right to tell them to wait outside, and also has the right to do a full breakdown interview of you and your spouse separately and together, right? So you want to make sure that if your spouse is coming with you to the interview, that you two are prepared to answer questions about each other. Right? So only the non-US citizen or permanent resident spouse has to actually go to the visa interview at the embassy. If both of you show up, then the officer has the right to do a deeper interview of both of you. So you both need to be prepared. If you know that you have any negative immigration history, you've had visas denied and all of that, please be prepared to talk about it, right? Know why your visa was denied, and make sure that when the officer brings it up, you do not deny that you've had a visa denied. Talk to the officer about what happened. I didn't have enough proof of, that I was going to come back. I went to the interview, they didn't approve me because they didn't think I was going to come back. Right? Something simple. Have a very short explanation of why your previous visa was denied. Make sure it's accurate, but don't go into a full 10-minute explanation. If the officer wants more information, they're going to ask you. Remember, the officer has your previous immigration files, so they know why your previous visa was denied. They just want you to tell them briefly why it was denied, to make sure that you're not trying to lie to them. So be honest, but be very direct and succinct with your answers. Finally, know that any document that you have ever sent to the US Embassy or USCIS is in your immigration file. You get one A file, and everything that the US government has on you that you have ever applied for immigration-wise goes in that file. So the officer already knows all your history. So when they're asking you a question about your immigration history, be honest, because they already know. That you know what documents to bring, what questions to be prepared for, and some tips to help you prepare for the interview. Let's talk about you, right? Mentally preparing for the interview. You need to make sure that you are ready to answer the questions, that you have a way of calming yourself down. It is very nerve-wracking. Oh my goodness, I have been through the visa interview, not marriage, but my mom went through a marriage-based visa interview and we had to be there. So I know how nerve-wracking it can be. So I want you to be prepared. If you need to do a mock interview, do that. Okay, be as prepared as you can be for this interview, because the marriage-based interview is the last step. The marriage interview is the last step. This is where your visa can either be approved or refused. So you want to make sure that you are prepared, you have your documents, you're ready to answer the questions, and you are calm and collected and ready to get that win. If you have any questions about this topic or US immigration in general, please put your questions in the comments. And if you are going through an immigration process and you want to speak with me to figure out what the best options are for you, what steps you need to take, and to see if we can work together, please go ahead and schedule a strategy session. You can do that by going to my website, Lillylegal.com, or by calling my office at 508-443-1788.